Brainwashed by Tom Burrell, challenging the myth of black inferiority. Chapter 1, The Scorch at the Bottom of the Melting Pot. And a quote by W.E.B. Du Bois. But in the propaganda against the Negro since emancipation in this land, we face one of the most stupendous efforts the world ever saw to discrete human beings. An effort involving universities, history, science, social life, and religion. Chapter 1. The marking of the black inferiority and white superiority as building blocks for the foundation of America is a chicken that has finally come home to roost. Now we must ask ourselves, did the world's greatest brainwashing campaign work? Fast forward 233 years. Yes, it worked brilliantly. That response, however, is incomplete. To discover the real answer, we must strip away multiple layers of complex conditioning. Part of the black inferiority campaign is to convince us that we can't handle the truth, that we're better off not knowing. It's an extremely patronizing message. We are capable enough and strong enough to handle the truth. More importantly, if we are to reverse the mindless preparation of the black inferiority or the BL campaign, we must go to that painful place so that we may claim our peace. Let's examine the effects of the brainwashing campaign from a visual perspective. Imagine a video collage of contemporary black images delivered in a flashing, rapid 30-second sequence. Try not to think in terms of good or bad or right or wrong, but rather how familiar these scenes are. First point. A syncopated, heart-thumping hip-hop beat pulsates while music video-style images explodes on the screen with increasing tempo. Point 2. A ghetto corner cordoned off with a yellow police tape. Point 3. On the 6 o'clock news, a mother wails over the body of a black boy felled by another black boy with a gun. Point 4. Ivy League African Americans from Princeton, Harvard, and Yale running Fortune 500 companies. Point 5. Prison engorged with mostly dark-skinned inmates under 20. Point 6. Forlorn teenage girls with swollen pregnant bellies and scoiling pubes and boys sporting sagging pants zooming in and out of the picture. Point 7. The 21st century American dream in black Oprah Winfrey, Maya Angelou, Will Smith, Whoopi Goldberg, Condoleezza Rice, Colin Powell, and other role models. Point 8. Tattooed rappers half naked, booty shaking women, and hilariously funny but race debating comedians. Point 9. Halle Berry seducing. 10. Tiger Woods swinging. 11. Michael Jordan flying. 12. Beyonce singing. Flavor Flav bling bling. 13. Stressed out, hard-working, underpaid workers walking through in an commonly depressed neighborhood. Point 13. Empty faces of neglect and abandoned elders, emancipated adults, and obscene children malnourished in the land of plenty, all disproportionately suffering from junk food diets, diabetes, heart disease, HIV and AIDS, and other long ignored, untreated, yet preventable diseases. And an urban school resembling an outdated factory with armed guards. Point 16. A teacher/warden in an overcrowded classroom attempts to instruct children who run the gamut from hyperactive to comatose. Point 17. Photo gallery, Thurgood Marshall, Martin Luther King Jr., and other Black History Month politicians and dignitaries. Point 18. The montage slows to its finale with Hail to the Chief soaring in the background. Dominating the screen is a glorious photo of Barack Obama with the First Lady Michelle by his side. Images fade to black with the voice of the nation's 44th president repeating the now familiar phrase, "It's our time." Exceptional exceptions. Exceptional exceptions. Of all the faces in my video collage, which one were most likely influenced by the inferior black, superior white brainwashing campaign? All of them. I can just hear the critics. Whoa, hold up, Burrell. Sure, there's some black negative on this great grand scale, but how can you say all blacks are brainwashed to feel inferior when you just know the inspiring examples of prideful, positive, progressive African Americans excelling and accomplishing historical feats? As an African American who have has made his living understanding and utilizing the power of propaganda, I have unapologetically used the principle of psychology and emotion persuasion to promote products and agendas. I recognize marketing brilliance and cognizant of the country's addictions to feeding its illusion of being free and equal society, where anyone and everyone can succeed despite cultural and economic obstacles. Training the spotlight on well-deserved African American achiever clouds the realities that they grapple with daily, that they gra- that they grapple with daily. The illusion that anyone can succeed, what I call the paradox of progress, solidifies the myth of a post-racial society. It weakens the impulse to understand or help those still scorched at the bottom of America's melting pot. It fuels the perceptions that all is well and racism is dead, and suggests that those still wallowing in poverty made conscious choices to live in that stratum. If not many reasons, they simply followed Holly, Tiger, Oprah, or even Tom Burrell's lead. They'll quit belly aching, grab those bootstraps, and go to work. Hold on, it's even more convoluted. Convoluted. Blacks who've been conditioned to expect less from people who look like themselves automatically insert these high profile black achievers into the exceptional exceptions file. Many are positioned on pedestals with no demands of accountability towards those that they left behind. After all, these people have achieved so much. They're different. They're exceptional. Some prominent black achievers have actually opened their own Kool-Aid stands. They too consider themselves exceptions and in many instances, consciously or unconsciously, have begun to regard blacks or lesser social status or achievement as inferior. Ironically, in many ways, the progress paradox is an impediment of substantive collective progress. Consider the recent FBI crime statistics, census figures associated with poverty, or the conclusions found in the book put out annually by the National Urban League, The State of Black America. They relieve the same ongoing depressing themes: social chaos, irresponsibility, spending, economic stagnation, and disproportionately death and incarceration rates. No matter what the category, blacks statistically trail behind whites and other ethnicities, and in some areas, such as educational achievement and overall life expectancy, our numbers are actually getting worse. Our numbers are actually getting worse. Our numbers are actually getting worse. Regardless of our individual social, economic, or media success, it has not affected the black bottom line. Therefore, though black progress is more visible today than seen than ever before, I maintain that unwritten audacity promotion of white superiority and black inferiority was and still is the most effective, successful marketing propaganda campaign in the history of the world. African Americans, no matter how severe, educated, or financially privileged, could not completely avoid the conditioning that resulted from increasingly sophisticated bombardment of subtle and not so subtle messages created to reinforce how different and inherently inferior blacks are when compared to whites. In this perpetual state of otherness, there is no disputing our unequal status. Like Coca-Cola, the black inferiority product has been modernized and updated with time. But don't be mistaken. The intent is to keep the original message firmly embedded in our psyches. White superiority was, is, and unless we block the negativity, will always be the real thing. Early indoctrination to my own inferiority fueled a determination to succeed. I remember coming to a conscious decision when I detached adulthood that rather than continue internalizing the hurt and humiliation, I'll just show them. I'll just show them. I tried to deal with it in a very variety of ways, starting with the ideal of fooling the man, making all believe that I was something other than they said. Some days I try my best, other days I just want to give in, accept the lesser status, and engage in cynical behavior. Ultimately, I choose the fake it till you make it approach. spoofing the public until I was financially secure enough to retire in the category of my own design. This line of thinking continued until I was more than 40 years old, well after I established my marketing firm. Burrell Communications was touted for mastering the skills of positive commercial propaganda. Perhaps it was because of our commitment to understanding, mastering, and utilizing Savvy techniques, required all the sell products and influence behavior that certain realities finally clarified and eventually inspired this journey. All I know for sure is at some point it dawned on me that I was not faking. I was indeed just as smart, just as brave, just as disciplined, and just as beautiful as what I thought I was pretending to be. The more I learned about the origin of my issues, which have been festering from the legacy of chattel slavery, the more I was able to see the same wounds in others. It was then I realized that, like most Americans, had been brainwashed. And it was then I realized that I, like most Americans, have been brainwashed. Propaganda campaigns. Maybe I'm expressing a sense of atonement, or maybe it's just that I don't want to leave this planet without putting my life skills to the ultimate test. I've decided to adopt a strategy similar to that of Edward Bernays, the nephew of the famous psychiatrist Sigmund Freud. Bernays was considered many experts to the first public relations professional. In fact, he takes credit for inventing the term. Bernays adapted some of the Uncle Sigmund's revolutionary psychological students to aid the government World War II media offensive and help manipulate the American masses for fun and profit. Bernays didn't call himself a propagandist. Back then, the Germans had already given the world the negative taint, and it still carries today. Instead, Bernays called himself a public relations expert. In a very real way, his first propaganda triumph was to exchange the image of propaganda itself. In a way, this book follows Bernays' lead. The intent is to thoroughly dissect this white superiority and black inferiority phenomenon, demonstrate how it still retards our social, personal, and economic advancement, and then help America flip the script to neutralize the techniques. Unlike Bernays, I have no intentions of shying away from the term propaganda. I say we use it, take what was thrown at us, shuck it off, and replace it with a positive propaganda. Propaganda is the outer layer of this brainwashing onion. After all, in the market world, propaganda is the first tool utilized to achieve a desired outcome. Brainwashing is the outcome, but propaganda got us here, and it is continually used to keep its inferior superiority mind game in play. Instead of using torture and other coercive techniques, the stealthy media Soviet propagandists use its mass media and other forms of communication to change minds and mold ways of thinking. In the United States, the first society in theory governed by popular opinion, propaganda became a critical tool of wealthy governing elite. For instance, the powerful words freedom and justice for all overshadow the reality that both were denied to black slaves. Yet those words as propaganda tools help solidify the images of the burgeoning nation. There are many propaganda principles, but here are a few that I believe were of prime importance in the 18th century black inferiority marketing strategy. These principles were employed throughout the colonial period of the late 1700s, reconstructions in the late 1800s, the 20th century civil rights movement, and still survived in modern times. The big lie. The repeated and consistent articulation of a partial, distorted, or manufactured truth. Point 1. Colonial era. Black slaves are subhuman beasts. The Reconstruct area. Emancipated blacks are still inferior to whites. Point 3. Civil rights era. Blacks are angry, dangerous, unemployed, and addicted to welfare. Point 4. Modern era. Low-income blacks are innate failures, responsible for their own moral and economic decline. New header. Appeal to fear. The purposeful effort to instill apprehension and panic. Point 1. Colonial era. Changing the status of blacks will threaten our livelihood and destroy our way of life. Point 2. Reconstruction era. Emancipation of blacks will seek revenge and rape white women. Point 3. Civil rights era. Blacks are revolutionary communists. They're moving too fast and want too much at once. Black power really means race war. Point 4. Modern era. Low income blacks are violent and prone to crime. They threaten property values and must be contained or incarcerated. Second header. Appeal to prejudice. Attaching a value or moral label to flawed but well established perception. Point 1. Colonial area. Whites are physically, mentally, and morally superior to blacks. Point 2. Reconstruction era. Blacks want and need to be subjugated. They cannot function in a free society. Point 3. Civil rights era. Whites have earned economic and social privilege through hard work, discipline, high morals, and family values. Point 4. Modern era. Social and economic woes are attributed solely to irresponsible black parenting, crime coddling communities, and a sense of perceived victimization. Fourth header. Stereotyping. An exaggerating established perception of physical or cultural traits, attaching negative attributes to an entire group. Point 1. Colonial era. Black slaves are uncivilized, childlike, and content with bondage. Point 2. Reconstruction era. Emancipated blacks are buffoons, lazy, illiterate, and rapists. Point 3. Civil rights era. Blacks are angry, impatient, murderers. Point 4. Modern era. Low-income blacks are drug addicted, criminal, oversexed, dependent on the government assistance, and irresponsible. Anti-Jewish propaganda. Perhaps the only group subjected to such an instinctive, calculated, world government-funded propaganda campaign were the Jews under the reign of Germany's leader, Adolf Hitler, in the 30s and 40s. The Führer found propaganda a handy tool in spreading the dogma of Aryan superiority, achieving his military goals and justifying the mass eradication of Jews. The Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, headed by Hitler's propagandist Joseph Goebbels, churned out posters, films, and books that spreads Hitler's bile. Although Jews, like blacks, suffered under a deadly campaign of propaganda and brainwashing, the effort doesn't seem to have hampered their long-term cultural evolution or caused stifling psychological impairment. Jews don't rank with blacks in social and economic dysfunction. It's not that the Jewish people are better or stronger than black people. The Holocaust under Hitler, as deadly as horrific as it was, lasted about 12 years. Even by conservative standards, the Black Holocaust had a solid 250-year run. When examining Jewish culture, we understand that their physical and mental survival was attributed to their foundations in culture, family, and rituals. Among Jews in Egypt, Persia, Germany, America, and elsewhere, there is a common ritual, common belief, common values, and a common religious thread. A later chapter was illustrated. Such cultural riches were stolen from blacks. Slaves and their descendants had no assumed permanent structures to maintain their cultural roots. They continuously gobbled together culture based on white dictates. Slavery, Jim Crow, segregated society were not solid foundations. Black were programmatically stripped of their cultural identity and brainwashed into a mindset of black inferiority. A double whammy that's tough to overcome. Propaganda in the modern era. Branding and marketing. The principle of propaganda withstood the test of time, but propaganda by itself is just angry, vile, vicious sentiment. Just as a car engine works best with additional intricate parts, propaganda coupled with other promotional tools such as marketing, branding, made the black inferiority crusade a long-lasting success. Take marketing for an example. Think of it as a commercial for profit business and brainwashing and propaganda. It was all major companies used to sell products and services. Although marketing encompasses many endeavors, advertising is its most familiar form. Branding, in another word, with the diverse meanings and nonsense. Several of these apply to this book premise, including branding a product with a trademark or branding of skin as identifying mark. Branding also helps the consumer associate products with a widely accepted name, distinguishing it from similar products. In today's world, companies spend hundreds of millions, if not billions, to establish, promote, and protect their brands. Nike shoes, McDonald's, hamburgers, Apple computers, Starbucks coffee, United Airlines, Ivory soap. However, one of the first high value brands in America was not an inanimate product, it was humans. African Americans were turned into animate products, slaves, and the brand that the early ruling class literally and figuratively burned onto black Americans, as they did with livestock, was the permanent identifier of a subhuman inferiority. While some might argue that racist media practices died with the Jim Crow era, a few thousand folks stranded for days on sweltering rooftops or in the neck-deep toxic floor water in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina in 2005 might disagree. We, we, we now know that many of 24/7 news accounts of on black sniper attacks, mass murders, and the rape of women and babies were largely unfounded. What influenced seasoned journalists, policemen, and emergency workers to initially sidestep humanity and propagate exaggerated accounts of black crime? Again, media propaganda. Norman Combs, author of The Black Experience in America, The Immigrant Heritage of America, wrote about the genesis and ultimate result of this grand scheme. Not only did white America become convinced of white superiority and black inferiority, but it strove to impose these racial benefits on the Africans themselves. Slave masters gave a great deal of attention to the education and training of the ideal slave. At every point, this education was built on the belief in white superiority and black inferiority. Besides teaching the slave to despise his own history and culture, the master strove to inculcate his own value system into Africans' outlook. The white man's belief in the African's inferiority paralleled Africans' self hate. In short, we were brainwashed.